The 1920s sparked change in every direction. Americans flooded to cities, engaged in nightlife, and a new consumer market was created. While the 20s were seemingly roaring, New York City crime was also growing at mass rates. Migrations to cities resulted in more money, people, opportunity, but also rivalry. While crime and mobsters have existed for years, it became extremely prevalent in the 20s. As this was the era of prohibition, gangsters took this as an opportunity to make excess amounts of money, becoming bootleggers. This was only the start of an empire that was formed. A study taken of the crime rate in the United States shows just how prevalent crime was in the 20s. This study looked at a few cities across the United States and determined that there was a 24% escalation from 1920 to 1921, showing the impact of not only the 20s but of Prohibition as well. Additionally, from the pre Prohibition era all the way to 1932, the amount of federal convict reports showed a 561% increase, and the population in federal prisons increased by 361%. However, these numbers are only representative of those who have been caught and tried, not those who have gotten away with murder and laundering. The most important people of this crime era, those who continuously got away with illegal activity as they had influence over police and lawyers, were the five families. These families included the Lucchese, Bonanno, Colombo, Genovese, and, arguably most famous, the Gambino family. Mob ties are in the family blood for many of those who were involved. While the term family was used because many of those were blood related, the families also adopted outsiders who were brought into the inner circle. They took priority over different sections of the city and controlled different companies and areas, bringing in large sums of cash. They were feared by most of the city, allowing them to participate and control any area of business, from bakeries to saloons. These families were not always cruel without reason. However, they struggled with patience, and any individual who crossed them in any way was punished through assault or was now submissive to the family. These different families did at times spark rivalry, and their disagreements were typically not resolved through conversation, rather, revenge games. These different groups were civil to one another, however, had many different tools and skills at their disposal, making them a force to be reckoned with. While some families specialized in specific areas of crime, their activities did include drug trafficking, murder, assault, gambling, extortion, prostitution, loan sharking, labor racketeering, money laundering, arson, stock market manipulation, gasoline bootlegging, and infiltration of legitimate business. This image, a primary source, shows New York City police officers confiscating and destroying slot machines in the late 1920s and early 1930s. Civilians of this day thought that these five families and mobsters were heroes because they were providing them with entertainment such as slot machines, gambling, as well as alcohol, as they were spoke about in Hollywood film and in society. As previously discussed, mobsters would pay off police officers and law enforcement in order to keep their business running. This image was meant to be humorous, but can now provide great insight. The government was placed in this distribution of money breakdown, as it could be for taxes or to pay off the officers. However, this just demonstrates how lucrative and manipulative these families and mobsters could be and how determined they were to be wealthy. Now, you may be wondering why these groups continued for such a duration, and how they controlled such a wide range of businesses and areas. Let me explain further. One way that these families took control was through violent threats. Members of their communities knew of the sort of actions that these families took part in, one of which being murder. Therefore, they were submissive to the family out of fear. Additionally, whenever the families would get into legal trouble, not only would they have corrupt lawyers, but they would also use the threat of violence upon eyewitnesses, forcing them to testify in their favor. Also, these families have been subject to tampering with jury evidence and bribing judges to prevent government prosecution. Bribery and payoffs, which were key to preventing any sort of legal action taken against the family, were used all the way from the level of local police to judges. These families ran speakeasies and were bootleggers, which were illegal activities at this time. The distribution of alcohol was a common activity for these families because so many innocent civilians were interested in alcohol regardless of the law. Thus, they would turn to these families for distribution, an easy cash grab. The families did not fear the law, viewing themselves above it. Additionally, when a business was beginning to fail, these families might assist their monetary problems, loaning them money for something in return. These families had New York City and citizens and police under control, making them extremely hard to catch and try in an unbiased court. It was explained that, quote, the experienced criminal or boy brought up in gang culture approaches his trouble with the law as a matter which can be met in 1,000 ways. There are friends and fixers, perjury, bribery, and intimidation. Organized crime is extremely important because it changed the course of history and the future. Because of the organized crime in the 1920s, many people have become fascinated with these areas of work, sparking an increased rate of popularity of organized crime in the present day. Therefore, the need for an improved system of defense in the United States was crucial. Local police officers were actively being manipulated, so, in order to combat this issue, the Federal Bureau of Investigations was formed. This new organization's purpose was to investigate organized crime and not retreat from any findings regardless of the possible threats and attacks that may come. These families built a walkway for any and all crime. They were models of what to do and what not to do. The FBI saw that because of these families, crime was becoming a worldwide issue. For example, Lucky Luciano, a member of the Lucchese family who committed murder in order to gain status, was the head of the commission, a form of government for all those mobsters within the United States, but also in Italy. The commission was a way to settle different family disputes and allowed for peaceful conversation. These families sparked the interest of many, and these mobsters were celebrities of their time. The tactics and techniques of these families allowed for crime rates to steadily increase throughout the course of history as they glamorized crime. In present-day New York City, there are currently 22,000 people involved in gangs. This image shows some of the areas in New York City where gangs are presently active and dangerous. While today's gangs can arguably be slightly more violent than the five families, their actions were inspired by the crime in the 20s. This era was one with little opportunity for jobs, and these families brought in wealth strictly by their tactics, shaping the present-day mobsters and gangs, turning it into a worldwide issue.